Hello. Um, right, so there is a reason I very rarely talk about Brexit on my channel. Um, Up until this year, with COVID dominating everything, Brexit, I feel, has utterly dominated the British political discourse for the last 4 years, more than anything else. And it's been a very divisive thing. It goes without saying, bitterly divisive even. Um, I voted Remain, and I don't regret that decision. Looking back at my reasons for doing so, I don't want to say I feel vindicated because I think it's too early to say, but I don't regret it at all. Um, I find myself on this issue to be understanding and frustrated by both sides. So, what I mean by this is I voted Remain. I believe that was the right decision, but I really, really do understand the contentions that Eurosceptics have. They see the European Union as an arrogant, out of touch monolith that doesn't really respect democracy. And they cite various EU elections, referendums where nation states went a certain way and their decisions were disregarded by the EU. I do think that the European Union has a massive PR problem. And I think there might be Eurosceptics across the continent who are looking to see what transpires with Brexit. Brexit's a success, I do think that they will push for referendums in their own countries. But here's the thing, Brexiteers, I feel, are also very dogmatic. They are very focused on ideological righteousness. In my opinion, a lot more than what's practical. So, for example, right now we're now less than a month away from full exit, and there's a possibility we'll get a no deal. I cannot see how that would be good for this country. And now with the Biden administration coming in, there's some indication of hostilities with the Johnson administration over past comments that Johnson's made. But Joe Biden's an internationalist in a way that Donald Trump isn't, and that could be a problem. I hope the new American administration will be open-minded enough to work with Britain, and I think if they're hostile to us because of some politically incorrect comments that Johnson has made, or because of Rab's taking the knee comments, that would be incredibly short-sighted of the Biden administration. I mean, I think it would be a bit arrogant, for example, to say we're going to be hostile to London because the British Foreign Secretary didn't want to pander Black Lives Matter. That's ridiculous. Um, but we'll see what happens. But here's the thing: we were always the underdog in this. I mean, we're one nation. The EU is 27 nations. The idea that we were ever going to have the upper hand, I think, is just wishful thinking. And then if you mention that, Brexiteers say, "Oh, you don't believe in your country, you're unpatriotic." But I think you can be patriotic and believe in the country whilst also being genuinely concerned about the direction it's going in. I honestly think it is too early to say with if this is going to be successful or not. So I'm not as gloomy as some Europhiles, not at all. But by the same token, I do get quite frustrated with the frankly arrogance of this idea that magic Brexit will save everything. And anyone who has a different point of view, they are um, traitors. And there's people I otherwise respect who come out with these absurd statements, like Douglas Murray, for example. I respect Murray. I think he's a smart guy. I think he raises a lot of important points. But recently, he said that John Major should stop telling the British people what to do. Well, Major wasn't telling the British people what to do. He was simply offering his opinion. as a former prime minister who has first-hand experience of dealing with the EU. Um, there's an intolerance from the Leave side insofar as anyone who voices concerns is deemed to be, not legitimate, that they can't have an opinion. Um, and one of my biggest contentions with the Leave side is this notion that because they won the referendum, they're therefore the only people allowed an opinion. I think it's obnoxious in the extreme. That's not how democracy works. They won the referendum, so they have the mandate, but that doesn't mean the rest of us have to just shut up. And I will strongly fight that point. I've had people coming to this channel, Brexiteers, calling me all the names under the sun. Not much, but it's happened. And it's extremely intolerant. But then again, on the other hand, you get Europhiles who think that all Eurosceptics are little Englanders, and that is equally close-minded. Um, and I've just come across an article by the New European, by the German MEP, Green MEP, Terry Reintke. Hope I'm pronouncing her name properly. She was part of the campaign to the kind of love bombing Britain to try and get us to stay. And she says in this interview that she's prepared to wait for years for Britain to rejoin. In a sense, that's good. But it also got me thinking, well, do Europhiles like her really genuinely understand why 17 million people voted to leave? I don't think it's enough to say, oh, well, they were just lied to, because it's a bit patronizing. That's like saying, well, they're idiots. I think people like Terry Rink and others need to really understand the sincere contentions about the EU as an institution. And I'm not sure that they do. I think they have this idea that Eurosceptics are just dead by nationalism and that's it. They're sort of overlooking the fact that Eurosceptics have a sincere belief that the EU is a non-democratic institution that doesn't listen to ordinary people. So it's all very well talking about, oh, we miss Britain and please rejoin and so on. But if you want the United States of Europe, I would suggest that you're not a Democrat because even EU supporters in countries like France and elsewhere, I mean, take Macron for example, he's clearly pro EU, but he and other French presidents have consistently opposed the idea of a United States of Europe, which tends to be pushed from Germany, I have to say. That's something that will never happen. There could be a united Europe in the sense of very close cooperation, trade, and so on, but there has to be a basic respect for national sovereignty and differences. Because, I mean, let's just say, for the sake of argument, there was a United States of Europe. The arguments would be endless. Where would the capital be? What would the currency be? What would the language be? Europe is a continent, and the countries within it are very diverse. So, what Europhiles need to understand is that they can't just dismiss the patriotic sentiments of individual European nations. And I find myself frustrated with those sort of attitudes because I think that just plays into the hands of Eurosceptics. All it does is say, "Oh well, look, these Europhiles really want to take over the country and they want to trample on democracy." And when they basically disregard the results, it's hard to ignore that that is, in fact, maybe what they're doing. So I would say, as a starting point, Eurosceptics, excuse me, Europhiles, need to understand the anger against the EU. They need to understand it. If they don't understand that, if they don't try to understand it, then they're not going to be able to get the message across. Now, to be fair, even if they did understand it, they probably wouldn't get the message across anyway, because there's a lot of Brexiteers who genuinely despise the EU, and no message would change their mind on that. I will say this though, after January the 1st, if things do go south, I hope the Brexiteers won't blame the Remain side or the EU, because then it really is a case of taking back control. Then we are out. And if they start pointing fingers at the EU and blaming, as they like to say, Remoaners, I would say that they aren't taking responsibility for their decision. Um, I'm concerned. I think that we are going to find this a struggle. There's been some signs of optimism. We've had trade agreements with Japan and Canada, but as I understand it, and I might be wrong about this, the Canadian deal was partly on an EU format anyway. Um, Wherever there's progress, it needs to be welcomed. But there's two things here. Eurosceptics need to understand that when January comes, it's their responsibility. They can't blame anyone else if things go wrong. It's a decision that they made and they pushed. Also, that just because they were the winning side doesn't mean that in a democracy, people don't have a right to express concerns. This idea that former prime ministers can't have their opinion is absurd. You might not agree with that opinion, but they can have their opinion. And stating their opinion isn't the same as forcing people to agree with them. So that's for the Eurosceptic side. But for others who voted Remain, they need to stop looking at everything. They need to stop looking at 17 million of their compatriots as, ultra nationalists who voted Brexit because they have this sense of, um, I don't know, the past or something. I don't think it's that simple. And simply saying to mainline Europeans, Germans, French, and so on, who say we miss Britain, we want you to rejoin. I say, well, that's nice, thank you, but I hope you understand why so many of my compatriots went for that decision. Because I think, no one is going to thank you, or no one is going to appreciate the idea that you're looking down on them as being a nationalist or a I'm not saying, by the way, there aren't nationalists among the Brexiteers who are guided solely by that sort of ideology, but um, I suspect a lot of those people just voted that way because they were tired of the EU's attitude to democracy and being out of touch. And Europhiles need to understand that. Britain is a sovereign nation. There will never be a United States of Europe, and Europhiles need to get this into their head. It's I'm not talking about a European Union as a concept where countries work closely and have strong alliances and shared values. But there are some Europhiles who really do want a single monolithic country called the United States of Europe. It'll never happen. And they need to accept that. Um, so, in conclusion, I've no regrets about the way I voted, but I do sometimes feel frustrated at some Europhiles and pro EU people at their attitude insofar as how they perceive what Brexit is. By the same token, I feel frustrated at and resentful at Brexiteers who think that they're the only ones who are allowed an opinion because they won, or that, they can have this attitude that Remain people need to just shut up and not express their concerns. Incidentally, a lot of the people who, were throwing the term Ramona around are now campaigning for Trump. A lot of the British people who voted for Brexit and like to try and silence dissenting views by shouting Remainer and your Europhile traitors and so on. The very same people are now actively being PR stooges for Donald Trump and saying, "Oh, the election was stolen." To me, that's double standards. If you're going to say Remainers are sore losers, then what about Trump and what about his campaign? Um, as if it wasn't obvious, everything I'm talking about here is not generic, right? It's all everything I'm talking about is the attitude of some individuals. You cannot generalize 17 million people, and you can't generalize 16 million people either. It goes to both sides.